Tracy from Tracy KM Designs. Here for another little chat, knit chat, talk with Tracy, whatever you want to call it. I thought I might show some of the hats that I was working on lately. And I do my usual trick of finding the inside end without yarn barf. Usually if the outer end of the skein is tucked into one end, you can go into the opposite end and just reach in and usually find the end pretty easily. But as I was doing that, the label ripped off and I did not get the end. Somewhere in here is the end. So now I've got this big poofy thing that I could rewind on one of my yarn winders, but I don't feel like getting up and getting that set up. Oh, do I have it yet? No. You can tell because there's still two strands coming in and out of the end of the skein. Is the end in here? Is the end here? Did you see it? Okay. Got the end of this one. It's a little bit ragged. Red Heart, what are we doing? Might have to start a little bit further up on that one. This is the same pink that I used in this hat, which was the very first one that I made. This time, I thought I'd try matching it up with another solid, a gray. Let's see if I can find it. Okay, so here's the end from the outside. It was not tucked in. This is not one of those balls that gives you the tip which end to go in. So let's just try the one that's furthest away from that. Does anyone else get kind of creeped out when they're sticking their fingers into the skein of yarn and digging around? It's kind of like, is it consenting? What do we got? Ooh, single strand. So I've got the yarn end in here. That one went much better. Here we are. There we are. These two yarns are both Red Heart. One is Red Heart Soft. One is Soft Essentials. And they both have that kind of shiny look to them. The soft is a 4, 17 stitches on 5mm. The pink is a 5. I don't really use those numbers. Seems weird. And 6mm, 15 stitches. So we'll see how this goes. Kind of thought they were the same. If you look at the weird end of this pink one though, it is obviously thicker than the pink, than the gray. But further along, I mean, they look kind of the same. I'll stick with the same 8mm needles that I've been using all along. And we'll see what it turns out like. Each of these hats has turned out a little bit different, which has been really interesting for me. Although, I mean, I'm not surprised. I just find it kind of cool how you can knit the same thing over and over again and it's a little bit different. So this was the first one I did 56 stitches. This pink yarn, which I now see is a little bit thicker, and another pink yarn. And it's a little snug on me, a little tighter than I like my hats. So then I moved up to using 60 stitches. This was a Cascade pinwheel plus white. Then I did Cascade pinwheel both ends. Then I did Cascade pinwheel plus 2 different dark blues. And this one, which I think is called Faucets. And then I had a little bit left, so I thought, what can I do with that? And it turned out to be a little bit less than what I thought. This is a bulky yarn, so I only did 1 strand of that. Then I had another ball that was like the same, nice manly colors, or a woman that likes more neutrals. And again, I had a little bit left over, so I did 2 strands of black worsted. The top of this one came out a little bit different looking. I don't know if I maybe didn't reduce down as many stitches, because I do an extra row or 2 of decreases compared to the pattern. This was, I believe, just a beige worsted weight yarn that I found in my stash, plus Dar Panorama, which is a partially wool yarn. I think I used 8mm as well. It was a little bit floppy, so I did go ahead and wash it, hoping that the yarn would bloom up because it is part wool. It bloomed up a little bit, but not a whole lot. Then I found this black, it's called, I believe, Mirage. It's kind of a thicker, thin yarn in my stash. I don't really like the feel of it, but it turned out all right on this hat. Although I think I was a little short on the yarn, so it's a bit shorter. This one, whoop. Sears Vintage Giselle. It's got a bit of mohair in it. You can see the fuzz. It's a softly blending shades of green and blue and white. I've also had it in other shades, I think like pink and purpley colored ones. Bulky weight, so I used a single strand, and I used 7mm needles for this one. And it still seems pretty huge, but it's not very dense. So that was a nice one. Then I found some yarn in my stash from something that I had bought that was, I don't know, a sweater or something at a thrift store, and I loved the yarn, so I ripped it all apart and had balled it up, but it wasn't ever enough to really do anything with. But this time I thought, I can do a hat. So I got it out. It's got a really cool thick and thin texture to it, and a little bit of glitter. Can you see that sparkle in there? And it feels pretty decent. So I made that, and then I still had a bit of yarn left, and thought, well, I weigh each my hats so I can put it on my blog and keep track of how much yarn I've been using up. And I weighed the yarn that I had left over, and I had enough for another one. So indeed, I made another one. It's a little bit thin in places because the yarn gets very thin in spots, thick and thin. But if your head's cold, it'll keep you warm. So what else? Yeah. You might be wondering why I've knit 12 hats in a row. I'm also working on red scarves. Might seem that I get a little bored, but you can see each of them is different, right? And I tend to do this where I'll exhaust my enjoyment of a pattern after making multiples. Previous years I've done giant teddy bears, I've done mini bears, mini bunnies, which you can see in another video on this channel. Ponchos were popular for a while. I was doing some items for baby photographers. So I go through these cycles, but this one is a pretty intense one, but it is a great way to use up yarn. Less than 100 grams for most of these. Can't beat that. But it makes me think back of when I was a kid and some things that have come up recently. My older brother in the 70s was one of those kids who was clearly, at the time, what they called ADD. Now it's ADHD. He was a menace in school. He would take apart things. He was always into mischief because he was bored and he wanted to be doing things. Sorry, brother. And I, being the younger one, always wanted to be the good child. I enjoyed school. I knew as soon as I started school that I wanted to be the teacher because you got to be the boss and not be bossed around like my brother did to me. Sorry. And so I went through school. It was pretty easy most of the time. But frequently on report cards, there'd be comments like, I talk too much. Didn't seem like me. I daydream too much. I rush through work so I can read. I didn't really think anything of it until my youngest was in her teens and she was getting assessed for ADHD. And the funny thing was, I'd filled out her forms and we were going to her doctor's appointment and I forgot to take the forms. I also almost missed one of her doctor's appointments because I just totally forgot about it. We would get home the IEP forms every year, and almost every year her teacher would have to message me and say, have you sent them back yet? Or I would miss the date for setting up the interviews. And I just assumed I was an overworked stay-at-home mom with a side business with too much going on. Yeah, there was probably a little bit of that. And then I unexpectedly started working full-time. I went in to my favorite school to fill in for a teacher who had COVID, and it was only supposed to be a week. And then someone in her family overseas died, so she was going to be off for another week. And then that turned into 2 weeks, and then 3 weeks, etc. I was not looking for full-time work at that time. I enjoyed being a substitute teacher or supply teacher, as we call them in Ontario. And this position meant teaching something like 8 different classes. I had instrumental music for the grade 7s and 8s. I had music classes for the 4, 5, and 6s, art classes for the 5s and 6s, 8 30-minute periods a week with kindergarten class, half of that doing music, and 15 periods of science for grade 7 and 8 a week. So a lot of different subjects, a lot of different prepping. I knew nothing about the science curriculum or the art curriculum. And I hadn't even taught music long-term like that. So it was a really challenging year, although I did enjoy it. But I felt not so much overwhelmed all the time, but like I'd leave my office, get halfway to my classroom, realize I'd forgotten the test we were going to have, or I forgot my attendance sheet, or I forgot the instruments we needed for class. I was constantly forgetting something. And then last year, I started noticing a lot of my friends were starting to get diagnosed with ADHD. And I was like, is this my problem? And I talked to my doctor, and she said, yeah, could be. In the 70s, a lot of girls were not diagnosed because they presented differently than the boys. And I hate to gender behavior, but boys tend to be more disruptive, more active, more loud, more behavior issues. Well, girls tend to be more quiet, more dreamy, just more, a different way of being ADHD. And so they go through life just sort of masking up so that they can manage what they have to do. And when your systems suddenly change, like working full time, or your hormones change, like perimenopause, and when those happen at the same time, systems changed. I was working full time suddenly. Hormones were changing. It's basically a showdown, right? And I just couldn't keep up with it anymore. And I was finding last fall, I was finding myself so annoyed with everything. Just annoyed, forgetful. I wasn't sleeping. I had terrible insomnia, which I blamed on my postnasal drip and allergies. And I was just not fun to be around. So I did start a medication that has totally helped in a lot of ways. I feel much more on top of everything, much happier, I wasn't unhappy before, but I just was, it's like, you know, when you're in your home and suddenly the power goes out and you don't hear your fridge anymore. You don't hear your furnace fan. You don't hear the little hum of your computer. It's dead quiet. And you suddenly realize just how noisy your house is, even if no one's talking or there's no TV on or anything. And it was just like that in my brain. It was really weird. And I just found myself walking around being like, I'm happy. Life is good. I don't know, it was kind of weird. But I was still a little bit on the forgetful side. And that's still happening. So we might need to figure out a few more things because I hate being forgetful. So do I have ADHD? I don't know. Does it matter if I do? Nah. I learned to cope with it. I don't sit and stare out the window much, but sometimes I will find myself sitting and staring at something and my brain's gone totally blank or off to somewhere else. I don't hurry to finish my work so I can read. So that led me to thinking about how years ago I would see these videos, come and get ready with me. I'd be like, why would I want to waste like half an hour of my time watching you get ready for your day on YouTube? Do people do that? Like, it just seemed weird to me to spend half an hour or whatever it was while this person put on their makeup. And then I got into drawing and I was like, I would find these tutorials and I would follow tutorials, but then every once in a while I would find one that'd be like, come draw with me. I'd be like, okay, I'll learn what they're drawing. No, they're just drawing, drinking some coffee and talking to you. And it's not a tutorial. And since I wasn't really an artist, I was just following tutorials. I didn't see the point of sitting here while they were drawing. And I've come across a few like, come knit with me. And I was like, okay, what's this about? And I started watching some. And I was like, literally, she's just crocheting or knitting items that she's going to be putting up on her website to sell. And we're literally sitting there watching her crochet while she watches something on her computer or while she's watching a movie. Some of it's in fast forward. I'm like, this seems kind of silly, honestly. Sitting there watching someone else work on their projects. But you know, days like this when the house is really quiet, I actually like to put on videos or podcasts, and it's not always about what the content is. Sometimes it's just about knowing you're not the only person out there doing this. Because sometimes it can feel like that if you don't have a crafting community with you. But I have started this one. I'm doing the alternate needle cast on, which I've showed before. I did post the tutorial on that a couple weeks ago. If you haven't checked that out, it's a pretty quick cast on. So I'm going from the front, pulling it through. I go in from the back, pull it through, in from the front, pull it through. And I'm going to cast on 60 stitches. Does anyone else find this? Because sometimes you're really accurate in how many stitches you need to cast on. Like you're casting on and you're looking and like, yeah, that's about right. And then you count them and you're like 2 off. It always amazes me when I can do that. Like this past week on the last few hats that I did, I don't know if it's because it was a different yarn, but I was casting on and I was over by like 14 stitches each time. I was like, who knows? So here we are. That is the wrong side. That is the right side, because I'm going to be working in the round. So you can see how there's like a stitch that's forward and a stitch that's to the back. Forward, back, forward, back, forward, back. And it blends in really nicely with the cast on edge of your ribbing. So I'm going to continue on with that. And now that I've gotten a little bit further into it, I do see that the pink is slightly thicker than the gray. Why do yarn companies do that? One's called Soft. One's called Soft Essentials. They're almost the same. These number categories that they came out with after I got back into knitting, I understand why people like them. It simplifies it down a bit, but really it still all comes down to the actual gauge that's recommended, which isn't necessarily the gauge that you're going to knit with. So it just comes down to the gauge that you're going to knit with, right? It doesn't even matter what it says on the label. It's your gauge that matters, and I'm always telling people to do your gauge swatches. No, I'm not on this hat, but I mean, it's just a hat. It'll fit someone. As long as it's not too skimpy of a fabric, I'm fine with it. But I'll show you some other projects in another video where gauge really matters. Anyway, I think that's about it for today. It's just one of those gray, dull days here. I have the day off work, trying to tie up some loose ends. I'm working on a logo for our other YouTube channel. And I've got my side hustle, music resources. I gotta send out my email tomorrow, working tomorrow. Lots going on. Keeping myself busy. I hope you're keeping yourself busy and staying safe and healthy. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It's free. Looking to build this channel. It's nice to know that there are a few other people out there who might be watching. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next one.